I'm in the studio today with Tabby Rafael, who is a weekly columnist at the Jewish Journal and an award-winning writer and an advocate for all good things in this world. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the service you offer to so many of us. I want you to know, as I was driving over here, I really thought you yourself need to be recognized and highlighted and thanked because of the service that you're providing, Shireen.
Oh,
Not
Tabby.
everyone is doing what you're doing.
I appreciate you, but it takes one to know one. You know, as journalists, all we try to do is amplify voices and get, the voiceless to be heard, because sometimes the people that need to be heard are the ones that are silenced. And you've been doing such an incredible job. You've really dedicated your life to advocating for change for the Jewish people, for the oppressed. And you've done it through journalism. But it didn't just start as a journalist for you. It started for you as a student advocate when you were at UC San Diego. And tell us what it was like for you then, because it seems like you were fighting the same hatred then that we're seeing now, 20 years later.
That's right, actually. None of this is new territory for me. And when October 7th happened, I knew what this was. I understood the protests that started on campuses, that infamous Harvard letter signed by so many student groups that same weekend. I knew what that was, Shireen. I had seen that before. You have to remember, I started college 2 weeks after 9/11. I started college during the second intifada in Israel, where over 1,000 Israelis were killed or maimed by Hamas and other terrorists. And I will tell you, and I have said this before, that what I saw as a pro-Israel student leader in my undergraduate years, I had not seen since leaving the Islamic Republic of Iran, where Zionism is a capital offense. Most Americans don't know that, right? Zionism is a capital offense over there. And let me tell you what I saw. Having been raised in post-revolutionary Iran, as a Jew, I was very familiar with what the regime did, which was they very purposefully were among the first in the world to try to separate anti-Semitism from anti-Zionism, to try to separate the Jew from the Jewish state. Now, this may have happened in 1979 and then in the 80s, but by the time I was in college in 2004, I graduated in 2005, this is what I saw repeated on campus, and I hadn't seen that, right? I hadn't seen that before, where anti-Israel students would come up to your face, know that you were Jewish, tell you your state didn't have a right to exist, and then proceed by telling you they were not anti-Semitic. They were simply anti the Zionist regime, or, the whatever they called it. I saw effigies of then Prime Minister Sharon. There were effigies of President Bush. And I should actually say that I spent my first 2 years at UC Davis. I thought my calling in life was to be a veterinarian, so I went to the #1 veterinary program in the world. Don't ask how that turned out, because they handed me rubber gloves and told me to do something to a chicken that I didn't feel either me or the chicken were comfortable with, right? Plus, it was in the Bay Area. And I want to tell you, this was an important experience for me. I had either my whole life been among Jews in Tehran, and then when we escaped as protected refugees among Jews in Italy, in a refugee resettlement city called Ladispoli, us and the former Soviet Jews. It was the Iranian Jews, and we were all refugees. And then Los Angeles was my city of refuge. And I settled here. And then I also entered that small bubble of the Iranian Jewish community. And college was the most formative experience for me outside of the years I spent in Iran, because again, I returned to a scene that I had not seen since Iran in the late 1980s when I was growing up. And also, I entered an entirely new world where Jews are completely outnumbered by people who hate the Jewish state, and by de facto, I argue, also have a problem with Jews, right? The Bay Area is no joke for a nice Persian kid from LA, right? That's the real world out there. And so there were burning effigies of Bush and Sharon, as I said, right? And then when I went to UC San Diego, I'll never forget it. One day, I was the vice president of our pro-Israel student group, and we decided to throw a Yom Ha'atzmaut, Israel Independence Day celebration on campus, okay? It was a party, and like any good party, we had some balloons, and we had cake, and on the cake, we called it Peace for Peace, a piece of cake for peace. The whole motto of the day was for peace. We thought we were so cool. Why? Because we arrived at 8 a.m. By the way, I hope that people out there know that student pro-Israel leaders on campus are volunteers. They are not paid. They are primarily there to study, but studying is sometimes the last thing we're doing because we're under emotional and sometimes physical attack.
That is,
and I really hope people understand that, right? I didn't enter UC Davis or UC San Diego and major in how to emotionally survive anti-Semites. Okay? I majored in, again, the chicken story is for another day, okay? So we get there at 8 a.m. For a college student, that's a lot, especially if you don't have a morning class. We thought we were so great. Here comes the cake. Somebody get me the helium tank for my blue and white balloons. Lo and behold, the anti-Israel student groups had arrived an hour before us, and there's a very famous part of UC San Diego called Library Walk. We had reserved Price Center. Library Walk is the main artery way that leads down to Geisel Library down at the end, that wonderful library that looks like a spaceship. We arrive with everything, and we see there must have been 20 balloon arch rows filled with the biggest black balloons I've ever seen. Everyone there who was anti-Israel was dressed in black. And you know what it was, Shireen? That's when I realized they were in mourning. We were throwing a party. They were throwing a funeral, right? I've had all sorts of experiences, and I'll end with this, that my parents, now that I'm older, can probably withstand hearing. I have been face to face, neck to nose, neck to neck, nose to nose with guys twice my height, which isn't very hard, breathing down at me, right? Telling me to go back where I came from. And then I told them, I'm from Tehran. Where am I going to go? You go back to Orange County. You'll be safer there than I will be in Tehran with this regime, right? So in some ways, I've seen it all. I'll never forget the time that there's this terrible, terrible speaker and former professor named Norman Finkelstein. And he came to UC San Diego for SJP, and they co-sponsored him. And I remember standing up, and me and the pro-Israel students were probably 10 out of 200 at least in that entire room. And I remember I stood up and I raised my hand at his Q&A. I didn't heckle anybody, okay? Because this is not what we do in a liberal democracy.
Correct.
Okay. I didn't escape Iran, which savagely kept me from freedom of speech, to go to America and withhold someone's freedom of speech, even when they're saying something that I cannot stand. And by the way, is a cesspool of lies. Oh. I waited my turn. I raised my hand and I asked him a question so that he could clarify, because he had just blatantly lied about something that happened in 1967. And I remember the man told me to sit down and shut up. Now, I am a refugee, as I told you, and I went through college through two forces, the hand of God and grants and scholarships, right? He wasn't paying for my tuition. I was paying a tuition at UC San Diego, and I wasn't paying tuition to be told by somebody from out of state to sit down and shut up on my own campus. But I will tell you this. At the end of his talk, about 200 people surrounded me, and I had to be escorted out of that room by campus police as if I was the president visiting campus or a conservative speaker.
It's incredible to me that you had this courage at such a young age and that you have continued your advocacy through your journalism now. I mean, it really is incredible. You were one of the first people who reached out to me and said, is your daughter okay? Because you knew what it was like, because you've had that courage all your life. Why is this so important to you, Tabby? Why do you feel that you need to dedicate your every word and your every breath to advocating for your Jewish people in the state of Israel?
Thank you very much. First and foremost, Shireen, it's an identity issue. I'm going to make it very simple. I identify first as Jewish, and I'm not speaking on religious observance, though, yes, I do like to take that on, as much as I can. I'm speaking identity-wise. I think before October 7th, you had a very good chunk of American Jewry that identified perhaps, let's say, first as American, and then depending on their political affiliation, let's say 71%, okay? 70%, let's say, maybe American, Democratic, and then maybe they identified however they did, let's say female, and then maybe Jewish was maybe 4 or 5 somewhere down the list, right? I've never been that way. And I think it's because having escaped Iran, you see, as a refugee in the late 80s, I was stripped of my Iranian citizenship because I had to be allowed to enter this wonderful country. And so on paper, I was technically no longer on paper an Iranian. I was 16 years old before I became an American. So within that, let's say 9 years of time, because I came to America when I was 7, on paper, you could have said that me, Tabby, that I was actually a citizen of nowhere. What did that leave me? What identity did that leave? It left me to simply be called a Jew, and not in a pejorative way. To the American government and to particularly Congress, which thankfully passed the U.S. Refugee Act in 1980, I was seen as a protected religious minority, as Jewish. You can bet that to the regime in Iran, I was seen as just a Jew and not a full Iranian, even though Jews have been in Iran 1,300 years before Islam arrived to the area, right? And so really looking back on it, it starts with me for an identity issue. If I identify as Jewish first and foremost, what am I going to fight for first and foremost, right? And it is amazing, by the way, how that Jewish identity never takes away from how much I love being an American. I love this country, Shireen. I have a love affair with this country.
That's
right?
Country, yeah.
And it also doesn't affect the way I feel about America versus also having space there to be a Zionist and to love Israel, right?
Well, that's the beauty, because we share the same values. Being a Zionist, being an American are one and the same. The Western values, it's all the same core values. But let me ask you something, Tabby. You've been fighting now with your pen for 2 decades, okay? You've been using your advocacy through your journalism, and you're a weekly writer for the Jewish Journal. How has that changed since October 7th for you?
Everything has changed. Everything has changed. Before October 7th, and I've been a weekly columnist for 5 years for the Journal. It's such a blessing. I love it. I love what I do. Before, when you woke up and decided you wanted to write about something maybe a little bit frivolous, you did it. And now you actually think twice and you think, my God, 7 or 8 people were just killed in a terrorist attack in Yaffo. Am I going to write a satire about something right now, right? Am I going to write a piece about how Persian Jews do Rosh Hashanah? Is that even appropriate? But I'll tell you what's interesting. After October 7th, Jewish journalism became the entity from which emotionally I sometimes feel I need to escape, as well as one of the only refuges that I have for a sense of emotional security. And let me explain. There are so many times when I feel I need an escape from it, because as a writer and as a journalist myself, I find myself obsessively hitting that reload button, right? I want to tell you that the day that Iran attacked with its second missile and rocket strike in Israel 2 weeks ago was one of the longest days of my life. And I must have reloaded and refreshed that page 100 times. And I immediately thought, I need to write about this. I need to write about it right now. But then I had to weigh it against all of the other commitments that I had and even decide if I was in the headspace to do it. It's not for the faint of heart doing Jewish journalism right now. I am in talks to interview a child survivor of October 7th soon. Okay? 2 weeks ago, I sat down for an incredible 2-hour interview with a woman who's head of the Civil Commission in Israel investigating Hamas's crimes against families and women and children. and the stories that she told me, and it was on a Friday afternoon, and I'm writing this down and I'm objectively trying to document what she is telling me, and I am pausing it because I am breaking down. And then I have to close the laptop and somehow find the physical, emotional ability to enter Shabbat and to be with loved ones, right? So in that sense, yes, we all need a little bit of an escape, but I want to tell you how it's my refuge. I've always known about the, not even bias. You see, people call it anti-Israel bias in the media. It's not a bias, Shireen. It's a full-blown hostility. Yeah. I don't call it anti-Israel bias. I call it anti-Israel hostility. Yeah. Okay, it's truly it's a disease. It permeates, and it's a social club, right? Just ask Barry Weiss or anybody else who's ever had to leave, some of these major institutions. It's a social club. They even go out on Slack and they come after you. I mean, it's relentless. Jewish media today is one of the only refuges that this refugee has. Because I know that if Israel killed a Hamas leader, or how about if Israel annihilated a monster like Hassan Nasrallah, Jewish media is not going to focus on how charismatic he is. You understand? And that doesn't mean, by the way, that I don't check Haaretz, that I don't check some of the more left-leaning Israeli magazines and even the more left-leaning American press, right? I read it all. But I know that at the baseline, there is a certain security. Why? Because Jewish journalism will tell the truth. It's not that anyone is trying to protect my feelings. I'm a big girl, you see. I myself, like most Americans, don't trust the media anymore. Jewish journalism is the last vestige of trust that I can have in the media.
You hit on something so important right now, because we have all been in so much pain since October 7th, because you're right, it is not anti-Israel bias, it's hostility and it's hatred. Yeah. But then you open the Jewish Journal and you go and you feel this feeling of, we are doing God's work. We are righteous. We are doing good for the world. And it reloads you and it fuels you again. And you're absolutely right. And so my message would be today for everyone to pick up the Jewish Journal, pick up and read some Jewish news, because it will elevate you to know that we are doing the right thing.
That's right. And that's why it's in print and in paper. Though if you're like me, you've got your little Shabbat ritual. You sit there with your little cup of Persian tea and your little breakfast, and you just go through and you look and you, when the war stuff gets too heavy and those op-eds are too heartbreaking and the reporting from Israel is too devastating, you go to the food section, right? And then you maybe come back to another section. And I mean, and you actually, one thing that I love out of many things about the Jewish Journal, and I'm being really honest, is it doesn't sway left or right. And there's no agenda, right? There's no agenda. So again, for me, I find that credible. And thank you for that, because it's the thrill of a lifetime to have readers come up to me in the street, sometimes, out at events, even in the market, and say, I read you. You're Tabby Rafael. I read you every week. And sometimes they focus on a specific series, like the Satan series. And it's my satirical series in which every major terrorist leader gets sent to hell and has to have a conversation with Satan and his assistant, Sergio.
I love that.
Right?
I love that.
And so one person came to me at the last event and said, keep up the Satan series, right? And I'll tell you that you have to understand, you and I were born in the country of the voiceless, right? I can't possibly imagine squandering the second chance I had at life here in this country by sitting in LA and taking incessant selfies of myself and my hair, which is nothing to post about anyways. But you know what I mean?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, you've dedicated your life to advocate with your pen, and what your voice is so important. Honestly, for anyone who does not read the Jewish Journal, you must read Tabby Rafael, because she is hilarious and she's honest, and you really cover such important important topics and people, profiling people who need to be profiled. What you're doing is so important, and you've lived through it, and you've seen this, and this is nothing new for you. So because someone as a refugee, as a woman, as a Jew who's been advocating on college campuses, and now a journalist, can you look at this camera here and tell all the students out there a message that you want to share with them from experience?
Thank you for that. So first of all, I want you to know, I know everything you're going through. I know what it's like to feel overwhelmed. And I know what it's like to have entered college and you just maybe wanted to go to some parties and make a lot of friends. And now you're supposed to be seen as some encyclopedic reference for Israel and Middle East foreign policy at best. And at worst, you must explain why you're such a genocidal, bloodthirsty maniac. Right? It's the truth. I want to leave you with two things. The first one is this. No matter how overwhelming the other side seems to you, always remember that the people who matter most in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict are those who have skin in the game. Okay? As a Jew and as a pro-Israel advocate, if you're Jewish, you have skin in this game because this was the land that your ancestors and grandmothers and grandfathers and parents looked toward for 3,000 years, for 2,000 years, right? You have real skin in this game because guess what? Guess what? If things turn too unsafe in America, you have a home, and that home is Israel. If the people who are against you find themselves unsafe, they can move to any other part of the world, and they will be okay there. You can move to Israel and you will be okay there. You have skin in the game. And by the way, Palestinians have skin in the game. And if you have chances to dialogue, and I hope you do on campus with Palestinian students, take it. Because if you are a Jewish student, you have skin in the game. I know I am repeating this, but please remember it. Because you know what it'll do? It'll help you see all of the people out there that hate you as just a little bit smaller. I want you to make them a little bit smaller. Okay? Number one. Number two, I want you to remember that while a lot of these people go out and chant from the river to the sea because it's something they learned probably 2 weeks ago, you actually have ancestral roots to your eternal homeland, but you have something else. You have ancestral dreams. You see? You have prayers that from great-great-great-grandmothers who you never met and you never would have ever had a chance of meeting, who, if they were like my great-great-great-grandmother back in Iran, turned not to the east, but to the west, because that was the direction of Jerusalem. As powerful as it is to carry ancestral roots, you carry ancestral dreams. And with dreams, inevitably comes resilience, because you need resilience to fulfill a dream. So hold on to your heritage, hold on to those dreams, and hold on to the resilience of 3,000 years of a people who are still here and who are still a light.
Ah, Tabby, that was so beautiful, so spot on. Thank you for carrying the torch forward. Thank you for using your power to make this world a better place. Thank you for your moral clarity. And honestly, for anyone who doesn't read the Jewish Journal, you don't have to be Jewish to read it. Come in and take a look at how much love and encouragement there is in this paper. There's no hatred. It's all about unity and love, which is exactly what you do weekly in your column. Thank you, Tabby, for being here. Thank you for writing such beautiful pieces for us all to read.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sheen.
We'll see you all next time right here on Moms Matter.